Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're venturing into the darkest corners of America's wilderness, places where the trail ends, the road bends, and the night swallows every sound. I'll be sharing a collection of true encounters and chilling legends from remote mountains, shadowed forests, and lonely backroads across the country. These aren't campfire myths. These are real experiences that linger long after the sun goes down. So grab a blanket, kill the lights, and settle in for a journey where beauty meets terror. Don't forget to subscribe, drop a like, and share your own eerie stories in the comments. Now, let's begin. Story 1. The Shadow in the Hollow. Appalachian ridges clinging to the pines and oaks, soaking our jackets and curling around every branch like it had a life of its own. The air was damp, smelled of wet leaves and cold earth, and our boots sank into the soft mud as we moved slowly along the deer trail. My buddy, Rick, had his dog, Scout, running ahead, nose to the ground, following a scent we both hoped would lead to something bigger than the usual buck. I stayed a few steps behind, rifle loose in my hands, scanning the forest. The fog made everything muted, like the world had pressed pause, and the usual forest sounds, the birds, the rustle of squirrels, were gone, leaving a strange, heavy silence that seemed to press against my ears. We turned a bend in the trail and stumbled into a hollow I'd never seen before. It wasn't marked on any of the maps we carried, and I couldn't recall ever walking this route. The hollow was steep, ringed by dense trees whose trunks leaned inward like they were guarding the ground beneath. A fallen oak stretched across the low ground, half buried in moss and leaves, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was Rick, crouching down, maybe examining a track, but something about the figure made me freeze. It didn't move like a person, didn't breathe like one. Even the fog seemed to part differently around it, heavier, thicker. Scout started growling, low and steady, ears pinned back, hackles raised. The sound made my stomach knot. I whispered to Rick, nudging his shoulder lightly, "Hey, look there." He glanced, shrugged, eyes squinting through the mist. "What? Where?" he said. I pointed slowly, trying not to move too fast. The figure didn't shift immediately, but then, almost imperceptibly, it did. A tilt of the head, a shift of weight, and I caught what I could only call a face. Pale, too pale. The eyes were dark, hollow, and utterly still, and the skin around the mouth seemed off, like it wasn't fully alive or had never been alive the way we know it. My heart pounded against my ribs. Rick still didn't see it. I wanted to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. I could feel the hollow pressing in, the fog curling around my legs, my boots sinking into wet leaves. Scout started whining now, small, desperate whines, refusing to step closer. The dogs always had a sixth sense about things we couldn't see, and I trusted that more than anything else in the world. I slowly backed away, trying not to turn my back completely, trying to convince myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the morning mist, but my mind wouldn't let me. The figure shifted again, and that was all it took. Something deep inside me, some old part of my brain, screamed to run. I grabbed Rick by the sleeve, pulling him back, whispering urgently, "We need to go." Now, for a moment, I thought he was going to argue, but then he saw the tension in my face. The way Scout was barking softly, but with that low, fearful growl, and he nodded. We moved together, careful, slow, eyes never leaving the hollow, but the figure remained. Not chasing, not moving in the traditional sense, just there, watching, waiting. We reached the top of the ridge eventually, the fog starting to lift as the sun burned through in thin, grey streaks. We didn't speak much. There was nothing to say. The forest felt normal again, alive in the ordinary way it should, but I couldn't shake that hollow, that figure, that weight of something unhuman crouched in the damp undergrowth. I kept glancing behind me, expecting to see movement, but there was nothing. That day, we left without seeing a deer, without even trying to. We walked back to the truck in silence, each step heavy with unspoken fear. My hands shook as I loaded the rifles into the bed, my mind replaying the image over and over, the shape, the pale face, the impossibly still eyes. Even when we hit the highway and left the forest behind, it lingered, a presence I couldn't explain or name. Weeks later, I found myself in town at the diner, trying to laugh it off with Rick over breakfast. The conversation wandered, people came and went, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was there, sitting in the shadows at the edge of the lot, peering from the fog I could now see in my mind even on a sunny morning. I would see it in the reflection of my truck window, or catch it in the corner of my eye while walking home at night. Always just there, a shadow clinging to the edges of what I know, a presence I couldn't argue away. I tried telling myself it was stress, that I'd imagined it in the early morning fog, but that explanation never fit. I've been hunting all over Appalachia my whole life, and I know what it means when something freezes you like that, when dogs growl low and your instincts scream at you to run. That hollow was wrong, the figure was wrong, and I knew that even if I went back, I would never understand it. Sometimes, at night, I wake up thinking I hear footsteps outside the cabin, careful and deliberate, following the rhythm of my own. Sometimes, I see a shadow moving across the forest from my window, fleeting, gone before I can make sense of it. And I know, deep down, that it's watching, waiting, and that hollow isn't just a place, it's an echo of something that can't be explained, a reminder that some things in these mountains are not meant to be seen, but they can be felt, pressing close, patient and unyielding. Even now, years later, the memory sits heavy in my chest, a dull ache I can't shake. I've told friends, tried to make them understand, but they laugh it off. They don't know the feeling of being frozen by the forest itself, of seeing something so wrong that it leaves you shaking long after you leave the trees behind. I can't forget the shadow in that hollow. I can't unsee it. And sometimes when the wind moves through the pines just right, or when the fog rolls in low and heavy, I swear I can feel it there again, crouched among the fallen trees, waiting for the next fool to stumble into its hollow. I know I shouldn't think about it, shouldn't dwell, but the truth is, it's a part of me now. The shadow has left its mark, a silent warning I carry wherever I go. And sometimes, in the quiet moments when the world feels empty, I can almost hear it whisper, reminding me that not everything out there is meant to be understood, and some places are better left alone, no matter how much we think we know these mountains. It was just a hollow, just fog, just a figure crouched in the undergrowth. But it wasn't, and that day, that moment, taught me something I can't forget. Some shadows in Appalachia are patient, waiting, and they never leave, no matter how far you run. I keep reliving it in my mind, the way the fog clung, the way the dogs growled, the way that pale, impossible face lingered even when I turned away. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was a person, maybe it was something else. All I know is the fear was real, the presence was real, and the hollow, somehow, had marked me in a way that no time, no distance, and no sunlight can ever erase. Even now, driving past the ridges or walking the trails near our cabin, I feel it in the corner of my vision, a weight in the air, a presence that waits just beyond what I can see. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my core, that it's still out there, crouched and patient, waiting for the next person foolish enough to enter its hollow. Story 2, Footsteps Behind the Ridge. I remember that day like it was etched into the back of my mind, every detail sharp and heavy. We had been tracking a buck all morning along the eastern ridge, The kind of hunt where the forest feels alive and quiet all at once. The air was damp from an early drizzle that left the leaves slick and the soil soft underfoot. My buddy Tom was a few steps ahead, eyes scanning the slopes, rifle loosely in hand, while I followed behind, ears straining for the slightest crack of a branch or rustle of fur. The dogs ran on ahead sometimes, noses to the ground, tails stiff with anticipation. Everything seemed normal, the usual hush of the woods, until it wasn't. It started as a faint sound, almost imperceptible at first, soft footfalls on the wet underbrush. I told myself it was another hunter somewhere on the ridge, maybe following the same trail, but when I called out, my voice vanished into the foggy air, swallowed by the trees. No answer, just the sound moving in sync with my own steps. Each time I stopped, it stopped. Each time I started, it continued, precise and measured, echoing mine too perfectly to be random. My chest tightened, a low unease creeping through me, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once, expecting to see someone or something, but the fog was empty, the trees just trees. By midday, the footsteps had grown louder, more deliberate, though I never saw anyone. Tom laughed it off when I mentioned it, trying to sound casual, but I could tell even he felt the shift in the forest's weight. The usual forest sounds had dulled, the wind stilled, and even the dogs hesitated at certain patches of brush, ears twitching nervously. I remember one moment clearly. I paused on a narrow trail where the ridge fell sharply, trying to get my bearings, and I could swear the sound came from both sides, circling me, keeping pace. I froze, trying to rationalize it, telling myself it was just my imagination. But the instinct in my gut, the one honed over years in these woods, told me it was wrong. We pushed on, moving toward a small clearing where we'd planned to set up camp for the night. The sun dipped low, and the fog thickened along the hollow. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see someone emerge from the trees, but every time there was nothing. My breathing grew shallow, the weight in my chest heavy, and I could feel my hands trembling, though I kept my rifle loose in front of me, ready, though for what I didn't know. By evening, the steps stopped as abruptly as they had begun. The forest returned to its normal hush, the air lighter but still carrying that lingering sense of wrongness. We set up our small campfire in the clearing, the crackling flames throwing long shadows against the tree line. Tom and I sat quietly, listening to the forest resume its normal rhythm, the wind stirring the high branches and the distant calls of birds returning. I tried to laugh, tried to shake off the tension, but my eyes kept scanning the dark edges of the clearing. That's when I saw them. Footprints, faint but undeniable, circling the campfire in the damp soil. Too small to be ours and too deep, pressed into the earth like something deliberate, careful. My stomach dropped and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I nudged Tom, pointing without speaking. He leaned in, frowning. "Must be kids messing around," he said, but the expression on his face didn't match his words. He sounded unsure. We spent a restless night in the tent, ears straining for any sound, senses keyed up to every movement. Every branch snapping, every rustle of leaves felt amplified, and I could swear at one point I heard a soft footstep brushing the ground outside, moving just beyond the firelight. I stayed awake, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was the wind or a deer passing too close. But my gut told me it wasn't natural. By morning, the fog had lifted, but the tension remained, a low, steady thrum in my chest. Breaking camp, we found the trail ahead endless, twisted by the undergrowth, the ridge seeming taller, steeper, the paths looping back on themselves in ways that didn't make sense. Every few steps, I stopped, certain I heard those soft, deliberate footfalls pacing alongside me, though when I turned, there was nothing. Tom joked about it, but I could tell he felt the unease too, his laugh hollow, strained. We moved faster, boots slipping in the wet mud, each of us silent, nerves taut. The ridge seemed to stretch endlessly, as though the forest itself had become a labyrinth designed to hold us there, a quiet trap. By midday, we finally broke through onto a familiar path leading down the ridge. Relief hit, but it was muted, shadowed by the lingering sense that something had been with us, unseen but present. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake the memory. Some nights, I wake in my cabin, hearing the soft echo of footsteps pacing in the dark, circling me in ways that don't make sense. I see shadows where none should be, feel a weight pressing just beyond the edge of vision. It isn't tangible, but it's there, patient and silent, waiting. I've gone hunting many times since, in the same forests, along the same ridges, but nothing has ever followed me like that. No other hunter, no animal, no rustling of leaves fits the rhythm of those footsteps. I remember the damp soil, the fog clinging to my sleeves, the faint scent of something like smoke or earth after rain, and I know that memory has been etched into me, impossible to remove. I've told friends, tried to rationalize it, but their reassurances fall flat. They don't know what it's like to be followed by silence, by presence that leaves no trace except the feeling of eyes on your back, a rhythm in step with your own that makes your skin crawl. Even now, when I walk the ridge near my home, I can feel it. Soft steps in the underbrush, always just beyond hearing, following me. Sometimes I'll glance over my shoulder at the fog rising from the valleys, half expecting to see movement, and the hair on my neck rises before I convince myself it's nothing. But it isn't nothing. I know it isn't. That day on the ridge, with the fog, the soft echoing steps, and the footprints circling the campfire, left a mark, a quiet, insidious knowledge that the forest is not as empty as we think, that the shadows carry more than wind and rustling leaves, and that some things follow, patient and unseen, measuring you with each step. The unease never fully leaves. I still replay the day in my mind, the soft footfalls alongside mine, never ahead, never behind, always there. I think about the prints around our fire, small and impossibly deep, and wonder what or who made them. There was no one on that ridge, at least not anyone human in the way we know. And yet, I carry the memory with me, a quiet pulse of fear that resurfaces when the wind moves through the trees just right, when the fog rises from the hollow, when the woods are still and listening. I don't know if it was a person, a feral hunter, or something else entirely. I can't name it, can't explain it, but I know it followed us that day, marking its presence in ways that defy explanation. And though the ridge is far behind me now, the sound of those footsteps is never far from my mind. They echo in the dark corners of my memory, pacing silently, patiently, always keeping time with my own. And I know some part of me will never shake that feeling, will never truly be free of the ridge and whatever walked with us that day. Story 3. The cabin that wasn't there. I remember that morning clearly. The sky was a dull grey, clouds pressed low over the ridge, and the air smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves. It was the kind of early fall morning that always made the forest feel alive and heavy at the same time. Tom and I had been planning this trip for months, heading to a cabin our friend Joe owned, tucked deep in the hollows we'd hunted for years. Every year, we'd drive that narrow dirt road, past the old split-rail fence, past the creek where the water ran low in late September, until we reached Joe's cabin at the edge of a small clearing. But this time, it wasn't there. Instead, as we crested the last bend in the road, I saw a cabin, small, weathered, the kind that looks like it's been standing for decades, smoke curling lazily from its chimney. It had the same general shape as Joe's, but not his style, different windows, a porch that sagged on one side. My stomach tightened. "That's not Joe's cabin," I muttered, and Tom squinted through the morning haze, frowning. "Maybe they built a new one, didn't tell us," he said, trying to sound casual. But the way the cabin rested in the clearing, isolated, surrounded by the early fall fog clinging to the pines, made my skin crawl. We approached slowly, boots sinking into soft earth, rifles slung loosely across our backs. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking softly as the wind pushed it. The forest was unnervingly quiet, no birds, no rustle of squirrels, just the faint smoke smell from the chimney and the wet, cold air pressing against our faces. Inside, the cabin was empty. Dust coated the furniture like a fine grey blanket, sunlight streaming through grimy windows, revealing the years of neglect. And yet, there was a plate on the table, still warm enough to steam faintly in the cool morning air, stew congealed on its surface as if someone had been eating minutes before. My heart sank. Who was here?" I whispered, and Tom just shook his head, pale and silent. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. The way the dust seemed to hang in the air, the quiet, the faint smell of food that hadn't been prepared by any of us. Something was wrong. I couldn't explain it, not logically. But the cabin had a presence, a weight, like it was alive and aware of our intrusion. We moved quickly through the room, rifles raised, checking corners, the loft above, the small kitchen. Nothing stirred. There was no sound beyond the faint crackle of the dying firewood in the hearth, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Then it happened. A faint creak, the slow shift of a floorboard above our heads. I spun, rifle raised, heart hammering, but the loft was empty. My mind tried to reason it away, settling wood, a stray branch hitting the roof. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Something had been there, or maybe still was, hiding in plain sight, patient, waiting. Tom didn't speak. Neither of us did. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken, pressing in around our shoulders, making it hard to breathe. We bolted from the cabin, running down the dirt road back toward the main trail, our boots pounding the earth, leaves and twigs snapping underfoot. When we looked back, the cabin sat still in the clearing, smoke curling, windows dark and unreadable. Our breaths came fast, ragged. I couldn't shake the memory of that plate, that faintly warm stew, the sense that someone, or something, had been there moments before we arrived. The next day we tried to return, eager to show Joe, to prove that we weren't imagining it. We pointed out the bend in the road, the clearing where the trees leaned just so, the exact spot where the cabin had stood. But there was nothing. Just forest, thick undergrowth, fallen leaves, and the faint hum of wind through the pines. No cabin, no smoke, no footprints. The earth had been undisturbed for decades, or at least that's what it seemed. I walked the area, touched the soil, looking for any evidence, any sign that the building had existed at all, but there was nothing. My hands trembled in the cool morning air, and Tom's face was pale, strained with disbelief. I haven't gone back to that road since. Every fall, when the leaves turn and the air hangs heavy with early frost and fog, I remember that cabin. I see it in my mind, smoke curling from the chimney, faint light flickering through grimy windows, and the plate on the table with congealed stew, still warm, still waiting. I can feel the weight of it, the silent, patient awareness of the place, pressing against my chest like a living thing. Even sitting here now, writing this, I feel it. The memory of the cabin alive, more real than anything tangible in my life. Sometimes, in dreams, I'm walking that dirt road again. The fog rolls thick across the ridges, the pines loom overhead, and the clearing appears suddenly, impossibly. The cabin is there, smoke curling lazily, warm and inviting, yet impossible to touch. I step onto the porch, heart racing, and the door creaks open, welcoming me. Inside, the air is heavy, thick with dust and the faint aroma of stew. And I feel watched, not by a person, but by the building itself. The walls seem to breathe, the floorboards whisper, and I want to leave, but my feet feel rooted, as if the cabin doesn't want me to go. I've tried telling people about it, but they smile, think I'm joking or spinning a tale. Friends laugh nervously, shake their heads. None of them know the way the forest can bend perception, the way the fog can make the impossible seem real. None of them understand the lingering weight, the sense of being observed by something not alive, yet not inanimate either. That cabin exists in my memory as vividly as any place I have ever been, and I carry it with me like a small, private terror. Sometimes I catch myself imagining the forest clearing just beyond my backyard, smoke curling from a distant chimney, shadows moving behind the windows. I see the cabin, small and weathered, and I feel the same tightness in my chest, the same creeping dread that made me run that first morning. Even years later, even with the roads and maps and landmarks I know, I cannot make it vanish from my mind. The place is unreal and yet impossibly tangible, a memory etched in the fog, the trees, the very air itself. The strangest part is that I don't know why it appeared or what it was. Was it a trick of the mind, shaped by expectation and fatigue? A hidden, abandoned building we had simply overlooked? Or something else, something patient, aware, observing us in ways we could not comprehend? I don't have answers, and I never will. The forest doesn't give explanations, and the mountains keep their secrets. All I know is that morning, the way the fog hung, the quiet air, the weight of that cabin's presence, and the plate of cold stew still warm on the table are real in a way that haunts me still. Every autumn, I dream of it. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night, hearing the faint crack of a floorboard, imagining the creak of the cabin's door opening, smelling the faint aroma of something long forgotten. The memory presses on me, and I realize that the forest, the ridges, and that impossible cabin are stitched into my consciousness in a way I cannot undo. I will never go back, and yet the image returns, season after season, like a quiet, patient warning, reminding me that some places are not meant to be understood, only remembered, felt, and feared. Story 4. Eyes in the Thicket. The day had been long, and the forest was settling into that uneasy quiet that comes just before dusk. I had been scouting a deer trail along the eastern ridge, the kind of path that winds through thick underbrush and fallen logs, where every snapped twig or rustling leaf makes your heart skip. The sun was low, dipping behind the ridge in streaks of orange and grey, and shadows began stretching long across the uneven ground, pooling in hollows and between tree trunks. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine, and the silence was broken only by the distant call of a crow or the faint murmur of wind through the trees. I moved slowly, rifle ready but loose in my hands, careful to keep my footing on the damp leaves and roots. That's when I noticed them. At first I thought it was a pair of deer, eyes catching the last light of the sun, but the gaze was wrong. It didn't shift nervously as deer eyes do, scanning and blinking, skittering away at the slightest movement. These eyes were fixed, patient, intelligent somehow, unblinking in the dimming light. My stomach tightened. I froze, listening. The forest seemed to hold its breath along with me. The eyes didn't move when I did, and yet each time I stepped forward, I felt the weight of them closer, somehow pressing in without a sound or emotion that I could see. My skin prickled, goose flesh crawling across my arms. I whispered to myself that it had to be deer or maybe someone hidden in the brush, another hunter playing tricks in the fading light, but no sound answered my voice. No movement, no rustle of cloth, nothing, just those eyes, reflecting the last of the sun, unblinking, unwavering, patient. I tried to shift my weight, moving back slightly, and my heart hammered against my ribs so loud I thought it might give me away. But the eyes stayed, fixed in the shadows, watching, judging, waiting. I crept backward, each step deliberate, careful not to make a snap or a rustle that would alert whatever was there. I kept my eyes trained on the thicket, trying to catch a glimpse of the shape behind them, but there was nothing visible, just the dense tangle of brush and leaves. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but I couldn't take my eyes off them. I couldn't look away. The forest had grown heavier somehow, the shadows thickening unnaturally, the air carrying a weight that made it hard to breathe. Eventually, the eyes vanished. I don't know if whatever it was melted back into the brush, or if they had simply been watching and then disappeared on their own terms. Relief washed over me, but it was hollow, a thin layer over the lingering unease that wrapped around my chest like a tight cord. I left the trail slowly, glancing over my shoulder repeatedly, imagining the gaze following me even though I could see nothing. When I told my friends later, they laughed it off, teasing me about being spooked by a pair of deer or letting the fading light play tricks on my eyes. I tried to argue, tried to make them understand the feeling of being observed with a patient, calculating awareness that no deer or human I've ever known could possess. But they didn't see it. They didn't feel the forest change its pulse around me, the shadows deepen, the air thicken with an invisible presence. Even now, long after that day, I feel it when I walk the woods. At the edge of the trees in the corner of my vision, I can sense something waiting, patient, unblinking. The memory of those eyes has stayed with me, sharper than any image, heavier than any fear I've carried. I know they are gone, that there is nothing to see, yet I feel watched every time I step into a thicket or peer into the underbrush. It's not a presence that moves or makes noise. It's the knowledge that the forest itself can observe, can hold you in its gaze, patient and unyielding, until you are no longer certain what is real and what is imagined. That night, lying in the tent, I dreamt of them again. Eyes glowing in the dark, unblinking, patient, following every movement I made, never advancing, never retreating. I woke with my heart racing, the sound of wind through the trees outside, blending with the memory of the gaze, pressing close even in my room far from the ridge. Every hunting season since, I carry the memory, feel the weight of unseen eyes along every trail, in every thicket, always just beyond clear sight. Even now when I walk alone in the mountains or peer through dense brush, I expect them to return, not in the form of a figure or a creature, but as that patient, watchful presence, the quiet knowledge that someone or something is observing, waiting, and measuring every step. It's a memory that refuses to fade, that sits heavy on my chest, a quiet terror in the way the forest shifts, in the way shadows deepen, in the way the world feels subtly, impossibly wrong when I remember that day. The sun will set, the ridge will darken, and I will see eyes again, patient and unblinking, as if the forest itself remembers and waits with me. I don't know what they wanted or why they were there, but I carry the memory as a warning. Some places in these mountains are not empty, and some presences are patient enough to wait forever at the edges of your sight. Story 5. The Whispering Stream. I remember that day like a cold ache in my bones. We'd been hiking for hours along the ridge, The kind of Appalachian trail that winds so tightly between the mountain's spine and the forest. You forget there's anything beyond those trees. It was late afternoon when we stopped at that stream, a narrow trickle spilling over mossy stones, clear enough to see the pebbles glinting beneath. The air had gone unnaturally quiet, the usual chorus of birds and rustling leaves falling away until even our own breathing seemed loud. I knelt first, cupping water to my lips, feeling the chill run down my arms, and that's when I thought I heard it, like a breath beneath the water. At first I laughed it off. My friends were teasing each other about who would drink first, joking about ghosts of old hunters haunting the creek. But that sound, it wasn't joking. It was a whisper, soft, drawn out, a string of syllables I couldn't recognize, barely audible over the gurgle of the stream. I froze, half expecting the others to hear it too. I glanced back at them. They were absorbed in tossing stones and filling bottles. The whisper came again, this time clearer, but no words I could catch. Just a tremor, a hiss beneath the surface of the water that made the hairs on my neck prickle. Leaning closer, I tried to trace the sound, shifting a stone with my fingers. The water moved like usual, but that voice, it seemed to come from the river itself. Impossible, I told myself. Water doesn't whisper. But the certainty of the sound lingered, crawling over my skin. I glanced at my friends again. "Did you hear that?" I asked quietly, half hoping one of them would admit it. They shook their heads, chuckling nervously, waving me off. As we followed the stream downstream, the whispering persisted, changing subtly with the movement of the water. It didn't flow like the creek, didn't gurgle along with it. Instead, it felt deliberate, curling around the stones, slithering under our boots where the mud was wet. When I leaned over to look at my reflection, I thought I saw more than my own face. A dark flicker, like a shadow lingering beneath the surface, watching. I jerked back, my heart thundering, and the sound shifted, turning into a low hiss that made me glance at the trees around us. Every branch seemed poised, every leaf holding its breath. My friends kept teasing me, but the laughter sounded hollow to me. It was then that I noticed the smell, damp, earthy, but tinged with something acrid, metallic, like iron or old blood. It wasn't strong, not enough to make them pause, but my stomach twisted. I wanted to leave, yet couldn't put down my gaze from the water. Every ripple, every stone seemed alive, like it was hiding something just beneath the surface. The whispers became insistent, curling around my ankles as we moved along the bank. I couldn't make sense of it, couldn't name what I was hearing, but I understood it. Leave. It wasn't a voice of anger or threat, not like shouting. It was patient, waiting, insistent, a language older than words, older than me. By the time we made camp, the sun had disappeared entirely behind the mountains, leaving the forest cloaked in an unbroken dusk. We set the fire near the stream, its orange light licking the edges of the trees, throwing our shadows long and jittery across the rocks. I kept glancing toward the water, imagining eyes beneath the surface, maybe shapes pressed against the bottom where the mud swirled with each ripple. My friends were joking about dinner and gear, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was waiting just beyond the firelight. The whispers were back, softer now, mingling with the rush of the stream, hovering at the edge of hearing. I swore I heard words that night, low murmurs in a rhythm that matched the water's flow. They weren't English, nor any language I knew, but somehow I understood them. Leave now. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was my mind playing tricks, but the sound came again, closer, as though whatever it was had crept along the bank to circle the fire. The shadows of the trees stretched unnaturally, twisting toward us. I whispered for my friends to listen. They laughed nervously, shaking their heads. "You're imagining things," one said, "just the wind and the water." But the wind didn't move the leaves, the water didn't carry words. I knew what I heard. I didn't sleep much. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves felt like it was meant for me. I imagined figures gliding in the trees just beyond the reach of the firelight, watching silently. Every now and then, a stone would skitter in the underbrush near our campsite, landing as though dropped carefully by some unseen hand. The whispers didn't stop. They seeped into my mind, curling around thoughts I didn't want, repeating that same simple command: leave. It was so quiet, so patient, I couldn't argue with it. By dawn, I couldn't wait any longer. Without waking the others, I packed my bag and began moving, trying to trace the path upstream to leave the stream behind. The forest seemed to close in as I walked, the usual light of morning failing to touch the mossy floor. Each step I took was mirrored somehow by the subtle echo of movement behind me, soft hisses and murmurs that made my skin crawl. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. No one. But the sound remained, wrapping itself around the stones, following me along the narrow path. I returned to the camp to find the others awake and anxious, the air thick with unease. They hadn't noticed the whispers, hadn't seen the shadow in the water, or felt the pressure of being watched. We packed quickly, moving in silence, our boots slapping against the damp earth, leaving the creek behind. Even then, as we ascended the ridge and the trees began to thin, I felt the pull of that voice in my mind, patient and insistent: leave. Not just now, but forever. It's been years since that trip. I can't return to that ridge without the old dread curling in my stomach, the memory of water whispering at my ankles. I think about that stream every hunting season, and I still hear it in dreams, the soft, patient voice that doesn't shout or demand, but insists. It's in the sound of water dripping from faucets, the rustle of leaves in the yard, the quiet hiss of rain over stones. I can't explain it. My friends don't believe me. They laugh when I warn them not to drink from that creek, not to linger by the water after dark. But I know what I heard, and I know the command it gave me: leave. Always leave. Sometimes I wonder if the stream waits, if the whispers are still there, hidden beneath the rocks and moss, patient for someone else to wander close. I try to forget, to tell myself it was just my imagination, just the isolation of the forest playing tricks. But the memory doesn't fade. When I close my eyes at night, I see the shimmer of water, hear the low, indistinct murmur that understood me without words. And I know that somewhere, that creek still flows, and the whispers still wait, waiting, patient, insistent, ready to speak again: leave. Even now, when I hear the rush of water, I pause, listen, half expecting the murmur to return. I can't stop myself. My chest tightens, my skin crawls, and I can almost feel it curling around my ankles, the patient insistence urging me to move on. I don't know if it's real, or if I made it real by hearing it so long ago, but I'll never go back to that ridge. I can't, because if I did, I'd hear it again, and this time, I'm not sure if I could leave. The memory stays with me, more alive than anything else I've known in those mountains. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, when the house is silent and the pipes groan with cold, I swear I hear it. The soft hiss of water, whispering in a language I understand perfectly, reminding me that some places don't let you go, no matter how far you run. Story 6. The Vanishing Buck. I remember the morning as if it were etched in frost on the pines themselves. The sun had barely crested the eastern ridge, spilling pale light over the frost-hardened ground, and I was already deep in the woods, scenting the crisp air, my rifle slung over my shoulder. That fall morning had that particular sharpness that makes the world feel more alive, more alert. Every twig that snapped, Every whisper of wind seemed like a message meant only for me. I had been tracking a buck for days, the largest one I had ever seen, and I knew these woods better than most. Every fallen log, every hollow, every shadow held a memory, a pattern, a trail I could read. But that morning, something felt off. Not in the way that warns you of danger, but more like the forest itself had paused to watch. I followed the buck's tracks through a narrow draw where the pines crowded so close together it felt like walking through a natural cathedral. The deer had moved silently, effortlessly, but the prints were clear, its hooves pressed deeply into the soft earth, leaving a record of where it had been. I was careful, not wanting to spook it, not wanting to scare away the opportunity I had been waiting for all season. Hours of patience, of creeping along the ridge lines, of whispering to myself over where it might appear, led me to a small clearing bathed in the weak morning sun. And there it was, the largest buck I had ever laid eyes on, antlers wide like branches of an ancient tree, chest broad, muscles taut beneath its coat. I knelt into the mossy earth, bracing my rifle, heart hammering in that way hunters know, the mixture of adrenaline and reverence that comes from standing in the presence of something so wild and magnificent. The buck stood there, calm, almost regal, and I lined up my shot. I could hear the quiet, the distant call of a crow, the rustle of leaves, and then the quiet, patient inhale of the forest itself. I squeezed the trigger. Nothing. Not a bang, not a crack, not the recoil I expected. I blinked, my finger still rested on the trigger, and the rifle was empty. I hadn't even chambered the round wrong. My pulse rattled in my ears. I turned, checking the mechanism, muttering to myself, certain I had misfired. But when I looked back, the clearing was empty. No buck, no rustling of leaves, no tremor in the grass where it had stood. Nothing but the wind through the pines, shaking frost off branches like snow falling from a height I could not see. I called out softly, my voice trembling, "Hey, you there?" And the forest answered only with silence. It wasn't unusual for deer to move away quietly, but this had been different. That moment of disappearance carried a weight, impossibility. I followed the tracks, tracing them in the soil, only to find they vanished as suddenly as the animal had. No signs of struggle, no prints leading elsewhere, nothing but untouched earth, frost, and the lingering mist hanging low over the ground. I tried to shake it off, telling myself the buck had bolted before I could even comprehend it. Maybe it had sensed me differently. Maybe the frost masked my scent. But even as I walked back to camp, a gnawing unease followed me, whispering that something about that deer hadn't been ordinary. Days passed, and I found myself unable to stop thinking about it. I even spoke to a neighbor who lived near the edge of the forest, an older man who had hunted these woods his whole life. "Seen a big buck lately?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He paused, squinting, brow furrowed, then leaned on his cane. "Funny you should ask," he said. "Saw a buck last week, biggest I've seen in years. Big antlers, chest wide as a barrel, walked slow-like it was hurt. One hind leg looked off, limping maybe, but not the usual limp. Then it just vanished." My stomach tightened. "Vanished," I repeated. He nodded slowly, shaking his head. Went right through the clearing like it weren't there. "I swear, son, I didn't see a thing to explain it. Just gone." I drove home that evening with the stories mixing in my mind, a heavy pit forming deep in my gut. That night, sleep came fitfully, every creak of the house making me start, every shadow in the corner of the room making me glance twice. I dreamed of that buck, its antlers scraping against the moonlight, eyes reflecting something I couldn't name, watching, waiting. The next weekend I went back to the woods, hoping to track it, hoping to understand. I followed familiar paths, back to the narrow draw, past the fallen logs, through the frost-thickened underbrush. But the tracks had disappeared entirely. The forest seemed denser, darker, heavier, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't just walking through it, I was part of its audience. Every snapping twig, every hiss of wind carried a sense of presence I could not identify. I thought I saw movement, shapes in the fog, shadows stretching where nothing should exist. My pulse raced, every sense taut, my eyes scanning for the familiar white blaze of the buck's chest, the glint of its antlers. Nothing. On the third day, I saw it again. From the edge of a ridge, the buck appeared in the clearing below, perfectly still, its gaze fixed, unblinking, and when I raised my rifle, the impossible happened. It vanished again, leaving only frost and mist where it had stood. I dropped the gun, my hands shaking, breath ragged, and I realized I had been chasing something that wasn't meant to be chased. Weeks passed. I tried to hunt normally, focusing on smaller deer, following regular trails, speaking to neighbors, but I could never forget that buck, that moment of impossible disappearance, the cold gnawing in my chest, as if the forest itself had judged me unworthy. Occasionally, other hunters spoke of it. The old man in the cabin across the ridge, the boy at the feed store, glimpses of a deer that appeared, then simply wasn't there. Some swore it moved differently, like it was aware of the observer, like the forest bent around it. I stopped hunting in that section of the woods. Even thinking about it made my stomach churn. And yet, I still go back, though never with a rifle, never expecting to see it again. I hike quietly, respecting the silence, trying to understand the way the shadows fall, the wind bends, the frost holds shapes that disappear when you look too closely. Sometimes, when I pause near a clearing at dawn, I think I see it. A flash of antlers, a blur at the edge of vision, gone the moment I focus. It has changed the way I walk through the woods, made me wary, patient, watchful. I tell myself the buck is a reminder, a lesson, or maybe nothing at all, just a trick of frost and fog. But the memory of that morning, the stillness, the impossible vanish, the feeling that something so large and alive could simply not exist in the way we understand existence, sticks to my mind like sap to bark. It is the kind of thing that whispers in your chest when you are alone in the forest, when the wind carries voices that aren't quite human, when the earth underfoot feels wrong. I sometimes wake at night, thinking I hear the distant thud of hooves in the frost, or see a flash of white against the dark trees. My friends laugh when I tell them, joking that I've lost my mind to the mountains. Maybe I have. Maybe the buck never existed in the way I remember it, a product of longing and imagination. Or maybe it is still there, somewhere beyond the edge of sight, moving through the forest on its own terms, unseen yet watching, patient yet impossible, and I am forever left with the echo of a chase that could never end. I have never seen a deer move like that since, not before, not after. And I never will. There is a part of the forest that is not ours, that follows rules we cannot comprehend, and that morning, standing in frost and mist, I glimpsed it, and it has never left me. Even now I feel its presence when I hike alone, a distant awareness at the edge of my vision, a reminder that some things in these Appalachian woods are not for us to capture, not for us to understand. And some mornings, when the wind shakes the pines just right, I swear I hear the faintest rustle of antlers moving, brushing against the frost, and I remember the vanishing buck, and my chest tightens, and I know the forest keeps its secrets, and I, like every other hunter before me, am left only with the quiet, impossible memory of what it felt like to see something that was never meant to be seen. Story 7. The Abandoned Truck. I remember the first time I saw it, though I try not to think about it too often. It was late October, the kind of late autumn day in the Appalachians when the light seems to sag and fold in on itself, leaving the woods a dark, uneasy grey. My friends and I had decided to explore a stretch of forest deeper than any of us had been before, an area we'd heard locals whisper about but never venture into. We'd been following a faint animal trail for a few hours, boots sinking into the damp, rust-colored leaves, when we stumbled into a clearing that didn't feel like it belonged to the forest at all. There, half buried in thick mud and weeds, was an old hunting truck. It looked like it had been there forever, though strangely untouched by the seasons in some ways, the rust eating into the body but the tires still holding a stubborn roundness, the windows cracked but not shattered, the cab sagging like it was sighing under the weight of something unsaid. Curiosity, that stubborn spark that always makes you look when you shouldn't, got the better of us. We approached slowly, and the forest seemed to hold its breath around us. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves, the kind of smell that clings to your hair and skin, and every step toward the truck made the woods feel colder, quieter. I remember how the light bounced off the metal, dull but sharp enough to catch the eye, and I could swear I saw shapes in the cab, though every time I blinked, they were gone. The truck door hung slightly ajar, inviting us in, and my friend Shane nudged it with the toe of his boot. It creaked open, the sound tearing through the hush of the forest, and inside, it was chaotic. Not in the way you'd expect from a looted or abandoned vehicle. This was more intimate, as if whoever had been there had left in a hurry, leaving fragments of their life scattered on the seats and floor. A lantern, still warm to the touch, rested on the passenger seat. Its flame had long since died, but the metal radiated heat that shouldn't have been possible. Papers, torn and folded, were littered across the dashboard and floorboards. One journal lay open, the page smeared with ink, words slanting and twisting in a way that made no sense. I tried to read them, but they seemed almost alive, as if the letters were squirming just out of comprehension. I reached for the journal, not sure why. Maybe I thought it would answer the strange tension pressing down on us, the way the forest seemed to lean in close and listen. The second my fingers brushed the page, a voice whispered, low and only just audible over the sound of the wind through the pines. It said, "Leave." My stomach dropped, and my chest tightened in a way I didn't recognize. My friends froze too, wide-eyed, and the forest seemed to tilt, the shadows elongating toward us as if to make good on the warning. We bolted without another word, stumbling over roots and rocks, our breaths loud and ragged in the unnatural silence. The clearing disappeared behind us as quickly as we could run, and even then, I could feel it in the back of my mind. The truck, or whatever it was, still watching, still waiting. By the time we stopped, hearts hammering and lungs burning, none of us spoke. We didn't need to. The next day, we couldn't stop thinking about it. We debated going back, imagining that maybe we'd been spooked by the shadows, by old folklore and our own imaginations. Against my better judgment, a couple of us returned with ropes and flashlights, determined to find that truck and prove it was nothing more than rust and mud. We found the clearing. At first, relief washed over us. No truck. But then we noticed the tire tracks in the mud, leading straight into the woods and disappearing, ending abruptly, like the vehicle had simply evaporated. There was no sign of disturbance, no path continuing beyond where the tires vanished, just mud, leaves, and an unsettling quiet. I tried to convince myself it was the terrain shifting, the mud swallowing the tracks, but the pattern of the prints was too deliberate. The ground bore the weight of something heavy moving through it, and then nothing, and that sense of deliberate presence never left me. Every time I close my eyes, I see the truck, the cab sagging, the lantern cold but radiant. The journal page just as incomprehensible as before. Sometimes I hear the whisper, not just in memory, but faint, when I'm alone in the woods behind my cabin, or even walking home along empty roads. Leave. I told people about it, tried to explain what we saw, what we felt, but the story never lands. My friends joke about it, saying it was a prank or exhaustion or the forest playing tricks on us. But I know what I know. I know the way that clearing seemed wrong. The way the forest seemed to lean in when we approached the truck. The way the air changed heavy and sticky when we touched the lantern and the journal. There was intent there, some human, or not entirely human, intent. Though I can't tell if it wanted us gone or merely wanted us to understand that we didn't belong there. Since then, I avoid that part of the forest. I stick to familiar trails, to areas with clearings I know and can mark on a map. But sometimes, when the wind is just right and the trees are quiet, I swear I hear the soft groan of metal, the faint scraping of tires against mud. Sometimes I think about going back to find answers, to see if the truck will reappear. But the rational part of me knows better. That place doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the forest, or something lurking in it, something patient. The strangest part is how normal everything feels afterward. The world resumes its rhythm, the creek running, leaves falling, birds calling, but the memory lingers, persistent and unwelcome. I've never felt safe in that forest again, though I hunt there occasionally, careful to avoid the deeper stretches. Every so often, I'll catch a glimpse of shapes moving in the peripheral of my vision, or the glint of metal in a clearing that shouldn't hold it, and the whisper, always at the edge of hearing, reminds me that some things in these mountains are patient, and some things are not meant to be found. I don't know if I'll ever explain what we saw. Maybe it's a trick of the light, the trees, our minds filling gaps in the emptiness. But I know it wasn't imagination. The lantern's warmth, the journal, the tire tracks leading nowhere, they were real. And the voice, so soft I can barely call it that, is imprinted on me. Leave. It's not a memory. It's a warning I carry every time I step into the forest, the same place where curiosity once nearly swallowed me whole. And sometimes, at night, when the wind rattles the window panes and the trees scrape against each other like bones, I swear I hear the truck slowly settling into the mud again, waiting for anyone foolish enough to wander where it doesn't belong. Even now, I can't tell if it was a man who left it or something else. I've thought about the people who may have been there before us, the hunters or travelers, long gone or claimed by the woods. But there's a weight to it, something deliberate that doesn't match human patterns. That clearing doesn't exist on maps, and the truck was never on roads. It's as if the forest itself offered it up to those who dared wander too far. And I think that's what haunts me most. Not what I saw, but the understanding that there are spaces that exist outside human reason, outside logic, spaces that enforce rules we can't comprehend, rules we obey whether we like it or not. I avoid that path now. I tell myself I've left curiosity behind, that the mountains hold enough lessons without chasing what should not be chased. Yet the memory follows. I dream of it sometimes. The cab sagging under an invisible weight, the scattered journal, the whisper threading through the trees. I wake in the dark with a chill, feeling the presence behind me, patient and deliberate, reminding me that the forest never forgets. And when the wind carries the right tone, soft and hollow through the pines, I hear it again. The single persistent word that has marked my life since that October day. Leave. I cannot explain it, cannot rationalize it. I can only remember it, relive it, and warn anyone who asks. Some roads in the Appalachians are not meant to be followed, some clearings not meant to be entered. The truck may never reappear, or it may wait just beyond sight, waiting for the next fool to ignore the quiet. And the worst part is knowing that it doesn't need to move to be there. Its presence, like the forest's own breath, can follow you. Even now, typing this in the dim light of my cabin, I can feel it at the edge of my awareness, patient, still whispering, "Leave." Story 8. The Hollow Man. I remember the first time I heard about the Hollow Man like it was yesterday, though it was decades ago. We were in the little diner just past Laurel's Creek, swapping hunting stories over coffee that had long gone cold. An old man, face-lined and sun-leathered, leaned over our table and whispered about a man who vanished one winter while tracking deer in the hollows west of town. "They say he never left," he muttered, tapping the side of his nose. At first, we laughed, me and my friends, full of the kind of bravado only a teenager can muster. Ghost stories were as much a part of growing up in Appalachia as picking wild berries or trudging through the snow-laden hollers. But there was a weight to his eyes, a seriousness that made us pause, if only briefly, before the familiar laughter overtook our unease. The hollow itself was deep and overgrown, tucked between two ridges where the pines grew so thick that sunlight barely touched the forest floor. The air smelled of damp moss, rotting leaves, and cold stone. We hiked in just after midday, the sky grey and muted, feeling the crunch of pine needles and brittle twigs beneath our boots. At first, it was exactly what we expected. Quiet, isolated, ordinary. The usual chorus of forest life. Crows, a distant woodpecker, the whisper of the wind, kept our nerves at ease. We joked about the Hollow Man imitating the old man's solemn whispers and even leaving footprints in mock patterns to trap him. It felt silly, childish. By the time the sun started to dip behind the ridges, though, the forest changed. Shadows stretched long and unnatural, twisting like they were alive, reaching for us. The air turned damp and biting, as if the hollow itself had exhaled a cold warning. I noticed it first, the silence that was heavier than any normal forest quiet. There were no birds, no insects, nothing. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, snaking through the trees without a sound. We moved more cautiously then, and that's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. A man, or something like a man, stood near the edge of the clearing, frozen as a tree, his outline black against the dimming green of the woods. No features, no eyes, no discernible clothing, just a smooth, blank silhouette, yet somehow undeniably human in shape. My chest tightened. I tried to tell myself it was a deer hunter or a lost hiker, a shadow, anything rational, but instinct screamed that it wasn't real. When I whispered for the others to look, they froze too, as if the forest itself had silenced us. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, but it felt alive, patient, waiting. We started walking again more briskly, trying to convince ourselves that putting distance between us and that hollow would erase the image. But the deeper we went, the more the air seemed to thicken, the wind dropping completely. Branches that had been harmless earlier now clawed at our jackets and faces. And then I noticed him again, or perhaps him and others like him. One at every bend, every clearing, sometimes barely visible between the tree trunks, always blank, always still. We began to run, the echo of our boots and shallow breaths filling the hollow with our panic. The sound should have been normal, but somehow it felt wrong, hollowed out, as if the forest swallowed it and left us exposed. We stumbled upon an old hunting trail, one I had passed many times but never knew the hollow connected to. My friends were nearly ahead of me, calling back nervously to hurry, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there it was, standing closer than I thought possible, yet remaining utterly motionless. My mind raced. Was this some trap? A prank? An elaborate trick by locals? But the more rational explanations fled under the weight of that silence, that blankness. It wasn't a person, not really. And yet it was, and it followed, patient and inevitable. Night fell fully while we stumbled down the trail, the forest turning from dark green to a black so absolute it pressed in on my skull. Our flashlights cut swaths of light into the darkness, illuminating only the nearest trees and leaves. Yet even within those beams, I could feel the figure closer, its presence more suffocating. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves, I flinched. Once, a shadow flickered across the path just ahead of me. I swear I caught the outline of its blank face, featureless, emotionless. But when I spun around, there was nothing. My heart thumped in my ears, my chest burning with panic. But still, I had to keep moving. Somewhere near the edge of the hollow, I tripped over a tree root and fell into the moss, scraping my knees, and when I looked up, I saw him, or it, in full view. Standing at the edge of the trail, he didn't approach, didn't run, didn't even seem to acknowledge me, and yet I felt every ounce of my body shrink with fear. There was a pull, a silent command, and I obeyed instinctively. I scrambled to my feet and ran faster than I ever had, dragging my friends along. Breathless, shaking, drenched in cold sweat, we finally stumbled back to the dirt road that led out of the hollow. The distant lights of a farmhouse flickering like salvation. Even when we reached safety, the feeling didn't leave. Every shadow along the road seemed too still, every tree a potential watcher. When we told our story later, nobody believed us. They laughed, called it a prank, teenage imagination, or old forest legends feeding fear. But I know what I saw, felt, and smelled. The cold presence that lingered in the hollows, patient and eternal. Years later, I tried to return, curious or foolish, I'm not sure which. The hollow was there, quiet and unremarkable in the light of day, just a dip in the ridge lined with pines. Nothing moved, no shadows, no figures, no whispers. I followed the trail for miles, seeking the bends and clearings where I'd glimpsed him before. Nothing. The forest seemed normal, mundane. And yet, every now and then, when the wind turns just right, or the sun catches the needles at a certain angle, I see it, briefly, far away, watching, patient, always silent. I avoid that hollow now, as I do the nearby ridges at night. But sometimes when I'm alone and the wind carries the smell of pine and wet earth, I feel him again, standing just out of sight, blank and patient, waiting. And I know that if I ever ventured too close, I would see him fully, a man made of shadow and absence, not bound by the laws of our world, not meant to be seen. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was fear, hallucination, exhaustion. Maybe some combination of shadows, old forest trails, and a story heard too many times in a diner. But rational thought is a fragile shield against something that feels timeless, patient, and aware. And no matter how far I drive from that hollow, that ridge, I can feel him behind me, always watching, always waiting, silent, featureless, impossible to ignore. I know I'll never forget, and part of me suspects I never will, because the Hollow Man isn't just a story, isn't just a memory. He is the hollow itself, patient, eternal, and unyielding. Even now, if I pass near that area, I slow down without thinking, every instinct screaming not to enter. And though the forest looks ordinary, every step, every shadow, every sudden quiet makes me check over my shoulder. And I feel it, that blank, unblinking presence, standing patient as ever, a reminder that some things never truly disappear. They only wait, silently, watching, and sometimes that's worse than any scream. I'll never go back. I know that now, but I also know I can never forget. The hollow has marked me, if not in body, then in mind, in that creeping, unshakable certainty that we are never truly alone in the forests we think we know. And the hollow man, patient and silent, waits there still, as he has for decades, as he always will, and I, like anyone else who glimpses him, carry that impossible, lingering dread with me forever. Story 10. The Clearing That Breathed. I don't remember why we set out that morning. Not really. It was late summer, the sun already bending low over the ridges, and my friends and I were restless, itching to wander the forest that hugged our little valley like a secret. The air was humid, thick with the scent of moss and damp pine needles, the kind that makes your lungs feel full before you even start walking. We had been following a faint deer trail, laughing at our own foolishness, joking about the old stories people whispered about the breathing clearing deeper in these hills. None of us believed them. I didn't, but that day, curiosity seemed stronger than reason, and we pressed on. The forest closed around us as we hiked further in, sunlight filtered through the canopy, patchy and lazy. I remember the quiet first. Not the quiet you get when the wind stops for a moment or when the birds go silent. No, this was a different quiet. It pressed against your ears, the kind that makes your own heartbeat feel loud. I called out a joke, something stupid about seeing a ghost of a long dead hunter, and my voice sounded hollow, bouncing back from the trees like it didn't belong to me. When we broke into the clearing, it was sudden. One moment, we were threading through ferns and fallen logs. The next, the trees opened up, and I stopped dead, I swear. The forest exhaled around us. The air was heavy, thick, and somehow alive. My chest tightened, my skin prickled, and I could feel it. Something beneath the soil, pulsing beneath the grass. The leaves weren't still, not quite. They shivered in a slow, rolling rhythm, like the ground itself was breathing. At first, I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. The forest was still. My friends noticed it too. I could see it in the way they paused, their laughter fading into a tight, strained quiet. We stepped carefully into the clearing. Each step made the sensation worse, the low hum crawling up through my shoes, vibrating in my bones. My stomach knotted, and the hair on my arms stood rigid. I wanted to tell everyone to leave, but the words stuck in my throat, caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. The more I looked around, the stranger it became. The shadows under the trees seemed heavier, darker, pooling into shapes that didn't belong. I thought I saw movement just at the edge of my vision, and every time I spun my head, nothing was there. "Do you feel that?" My friend Matt whispered, his voice shaking. He never gets scared. I nodded, though I didn't want to admit it. The clearing wasn't large, maybe 30 feet across, but it carried weight. It was like stepping into a lung, and we were intruders. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to get out before we drew too much attention, but my curiosity was a chain around my chest, heavy and suffocating. Then I noticed the grass, not just moving, but pulsing in tiny waves, rising and falling with a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I knelt down, and my hand hovered above the blades. The vibration hummed up my fingers, sending sharp jolts up my arm. This isn't right, I muttered, but I barely breathed the words before the sensation intensified. The earth felt aware, like it was pressing in on me, weighing me down, and for a moment I could almost imagine it thinking, watching. Something shifted near the tree line. I froze, my eyes snapping to the movement. A shadow, dark and thick, detached itself from the edge of the forest, and I could feel its gaze long before I saw it clearly. It wasn't a person, not exactly, not in the way a human is, and yet I knew it was watching. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering, the hum from the ground amplifying into a deep, resonant pulse that echoed in my chest. "Go," I whispered. Not a suggestion, a demand to myself, though I think everyone heard it. We turned to run, but even as we fled, I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes, or something, following us. Each step felt heavier, the air thicker. When I dared to glance over my shoulder, the clearing seemed to stretch, the shadows deepening in impossible ways. The forest exhaled again, slow and deliberate, and the vibration underfoot chased us out, leaving our breaths ragged and our limbs trembling. By the time we reached the trail, the clearing was behind us. The forest had returned to normal, or at least as normal as it ever is there. Sunlight filtered down, birds called tentatively from the branches, and I could almost convince myself it had been a trick of the light and the heat, but it wasn't. I could feel it in my chest, still. A rhythm, slow and patient, like the forest remembered us, like it had counted every step, every heartbeat. We didn't speak of it at first. Driving back to the valley, the road winding and familiar, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror. The woods seemed to linger at the edges of the windshield, and I thought I saw movement there, branches swaying where no wind touched them. I told myself it was exhaustion, the creeping unease of being in isolation for too long, but even now, years later, I can feel it. When the wind dies on a summer night, I feel the same hum under my feet, the same pulse in my chest, as if that clearing is still alive somewhere, waiting. I've tried to explain it. Friends laugh, dismiss it as imagination or the heat of the day. But I know what I saw. That clearing wasn't just a patch of forest. It was aware. It breathed, it watched, and it remembered. I've returned to the same trail since, avoided that hollow, avoided that ridge, but sometimes at night, when the forest is quiet and the wind doesn't stir the leaves, I can hear it again. A low, steady pulse, almost imperceptible, but there. And for a moment, I am back in that clearing, standing among grass that moves on its own, feeling the weight of something older than the trees press against my chest. I don't go back. I don't need to. The memory is enough. Enough to make my stomach twist and my limbs ache. Enough to make me question the quiet spaces in the forest, to wonder what watches, waits, and remembers when we pass through. The clearing is patient, indifferent, but it does not forget. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when everything is still, I can feel its rhythm echo through my bones, reminding me that it is still there, breathing, waiting, silently observing, and I am still alive only because it allows it